we don't know joy if we haven't experienced pain. And we don't appreciate the wins without having navigated the losses. And so when I think about what my definition of success is, to me, success is how am I doing good in the world? How am I helping other people? And in that execution of helping other people, am I truly experiencing joy?
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Thank you to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode. Tracksmith just released their spring collection, and as a season shift yet again, I'm proud to continue this partnership with them. Tracksmith is a brand for committed runners like you and me, people who know that the best part of a busy day is squeezing in a workout. They offer products for training, racing, and rest days, which you know I'm a fan of, and create experiences that make running more rewarding, more connected, and more meaningful. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN, all one word, will receive free shipping, and 5% of your purchase amount will be donated to the Michael J. Fox Foundation to help find a cure and support those living with Parkinson's. This episode is brought to you by Fours Labs. My cousin is a co-founder at Fours Labs, and the company's goal is to transform how we approach performance, injury, and recovery. Fours Labs is a company with recovery tools and products developed by experts from the NBA, NFL, MLB, and more. Their cryothermo massage gun is the first ever hot and cold massage head, unlike any other therapy gun out there. It was designed and inspired by both elite and pro athletes and is now available for everyone. Head to forslabs.com with the code FTLR to save 15% of your purchase. That's FORS labs.com with the code FTLR to save 15%. Welcome back. I have Emily Abbate joining me on the podcast. Did I get that right today?
You're doing good. You're doing good.
Perfect. Emily is tuned in from New York. Emily, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this.
Likewise. The first question is always a tough one. Who is Emily?
Whew. You're really starting off with a bang here. Jonathan, giving it to me straight. Who is Emily? I guess top level details would be that I am a wellness coach and podcaster, freelance journalist living in Brooklyn, New York, Connecticut, born and raised. I've been in New York for about 10 years now. And every day I am on a mission to help others live healthier, happier, more motivated lives in whatever way that looks like for them, in whatever way that looks for them. Yeah.
Awesome. I've been a fan of you and your podcast and everything you bring to the world. So first, thank you for that. Emily's podcast, Hurdle. It's not The Hurdle. Is that correct? It's just Hurdle.
That's correct. Hurdle.
Hurdle podcast is all about overcoming obstacles. And what I love about this podcast is it's an opportunity to dig through stories of success and what has allowed people to overcome those obstacles. And it's interesting to connect with someone both personally and professionally who is in a bit of a tangential space in terms of like the explorations and the stories that you're interested in. So I'm curious, where did all of that come from? Where did that curiosity come from for you?
That's a great question, Jonathan. I would say that I've always been a curious person. From a young age, I was always writing things down in notebooks and asking a lot of questions. I recall when I want to say 12 years old, although it could be 11 or it could be 13, but I participated in a local, let's call it like a pageant, but that sounds a little like froofy here. There's something where I grew up in Trumbull, Connecticut. There is a festival called the Barnum Festival, rooted in the story of P.T. Barnum and the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And so there's a local, I would say, scholarship pageant that dubs two high schoolers as prince and princess, two high schoolers as queen and king of this royal party, so to speak, of the Barnum and Bailey circus. And then there are the two elementary school kids who are Tom Thumb and Lavinia Warren. And in that like personality pageant, so to speak, it had nothing to do with looks. It was all just speaking to these judges. I was told at that point that they chose me to be Lavinia Warren because I was asking the judges all of the questions. Like instead of just talking about myself at age 12, I wanted to know how they were doing, what was going on, what they had for breakfast, like you name it. So that was a long-winded answer to tell you that I've been asking a lot of people a lot of questions for as long as I can remember.
That's amazing. I was at a running retreat this weekend, and one of the consensus that we came to was that curiosity is one of the best attributes that a person can have. If you're able to be curious, you're able to be successful, and you're able to be happy because like you drive that ability. Okay, so 12-year-old Emily from Trumbull, Connecticut. I'm actually quite familiar with Trumbull, Connecticut. I have an ex-girlfriend that lived there or grew up there, so I've like spent some time there as well.
You've hung out at the Trumbull Mall is what you're trying to tell me.
Yeah, unfortunately, I guess. So 12-year-old curious Emily, and things have changed a little bit since then. Maybe not. But talk to me about teenage years, 20s, etc. How did 12-year-old Emily evolve into the Emily of today?
Yeah, I mean, so many different ways I could take that question. I would say that, as I mentioned before, always writing notebooks. I always knew that I wanted to be a journalist. And I went to the University of Connecticut for journalism and political science, did a double major there, and thought a little bit about going the lawyer route for a long time because case law fascinates me. To this day, I'm just so interested as to why things are the way they are and learning how all of that kind of goes about. But for me, I knew that a lawyer's lifestyle probably wasn't my go-to. So I decided to pursue my passions for writing. And when I graduated from UConn, I had my first internship at the Hartford Courant. And then I started working at a website called cafemom.com. I was at Cafe Mom for like 3 years, which was a really great opportunity working for their women's lifestyle blog at the time, which was called The Stir. Because for me, during that time, I was able to dabble in a lot of different verticals, so to speak. So a lot of different content categories from home and food to healthy living and news, entertainment, you name it. And it was during that time that I started to realize how much I loved writing about health and wellness, which was at the time, this is, let me think here, around 2010, 2011, a new interest for me because during that time and in the years leading up to my first real job out of college, I went through a major weight loss transformation and that I lost about 70 pounds during college, kind of finishing off that chapter. Although I think it's a forever journey that we're on here when it comes to that kind of lifestyle change. But I lost that weight at the end of college, and that really sparked my interests and changed the trajectory of where I would go, not just as a journalist, but where my interests lay going forward.
So you dove into the field. Things were a little different back in 2011, 2012. And you've been in it your entire career. So many people go through life not enjoying what they do for work. Do you ever take a step back and acknowledge, when you get up and you lace up the shoes and you get out the door and you pull the mic up and, all this stuff that has become so routine for you? Talk to me about how your relationship with like what you get to do has evolved.
I love that phrasing, what you get to do. Yeah. So, I mean, to finish that career story off, I went from occasionally dabbling in writing health and fitness content to working at Rodale as a fitness editor and then at Self Magazine as their fitness editor. So I was really starting to combine my skill set and my passions into what we're talking about here, which is my quote unquote dream jobs. I got let go twice from both Rodale and Condé Nast as a beautiful byproduct of being in publishing, gestures loosely, the Times. And so yeah, when I got let go from Self Magazine, that, like I referenced, it was my dream job at the time to be their fitness editor, to be on locations for photo shoots. When I started at that job, I remember that I pitched them that I should go to Los Angeles and basically over the course of 72 hours, try as many workouts as possible. And they funded it. Like I went to LA and I did a bunch of workouts and I ran from one CrossFit gym to the LIT method to a Barry's, and I met with instructors and founders, and what an awesome opportunity. And to think that not only did they pay me while I was there, but that they paid for me to be there, which was just, it was crazy. So when I left Self, it was devastating. And I had to, at the time, really kind of, hit the ground running and think about what was it that I really liked from that experience and what were the parts from that experience that I didn't really like so much. And that's probably when anyone comes to me and asks me about pursuing their passions, especially when it comes to combining those passions with their work, I give them this advice. I say, divide up what you're currently doing into 3 columns. You've got column A, column B, and column C. Column A is the stuff that you are doing right now that you absolutely love. Like it feels kind of like you're in a flow state when you're doing it. This is the stuff that like it feels super breezy and you get a ton of enjoyment out of it. Column B is the stuff that's like, it's part of what you do, but it's not super enjoyable. It's not awful. It's just, this is part of the job. And column C is the stuff that you really just do not like at all. You make it often the monster. You wish that you could pay somebody else to do it, that kind of thing. And for me, I started to think about what fell into columns A and B and how I could design, so to speak, a role or a job that would mostly involve those things. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that right at the beginning, especially when, goodness, I was at the time, maybe 25, 26, thrust out on my own, just trying to figure out how to make money, needing to pay for my first studio apartment at the time, had bills. There were definitely things that fell into column C for a bit, but I really started to think and do an honest inventory of what is it that I like about my career right now and how can I do more of it? And I landed on this idea that my favorite thing to do is help people tell stories and storytelling. And I also, do have an affinity for writing, but the podcast thing for me, it didn't come for at least a year into that journey, largely because I needed to kind of grind around involving column C to pay for my bills until I figured out exactly how to really home in on the other two. And so, I landed on storytelling and connection being a huge part of who I am. And that's kind of how I stumbled into this podcast space.
I love that. I think we share a mutual friend in Mary Johnson who had a similar but different trajectory in how losing her job, I believe she worked at an agency, sort of thrust her into having the opportunity to do what she really loved. And she, started Lift, Run, Perform as a running coach and strength coach, and now has hundreds of athletes that look up to her and her coaches as a way to like better their lives. And it's so cool that something that seems so awful, losing your job, can be parlayed into something so transformational, not just for you and not just for her, but you just crossed 5 million downloads. Like that's a lot of people who have gotten to hear the lessons of your guests. And what I find to be really interesting is I had a conversation with Joe Holder on the podcast a few months ago at this point, and I was like, Joe, you've got a lot of followers. He's like, yeah, but forget that. It's all about the one. If I help one person, it's worth it to me. And so like I've sent him like the messages I've gotten from people who listened to that episode. And it's just so wild to me that like you can have that kind of an impact on somebody's whole world. We're both Jewish. We're both familiar with the concept of, I've referenced this one a few times, but it's specifically in regards to the Holocaust. But the line is, save one person, save a world entire. And so I reframe that away from like thinking about the Holocaust and into like, if you're able to have an impact on one person, that's an entire world. And so for me, with this podcast and with what I get to do, sometimes I just step back and I'm like, yeah, just one person is enough. And it's so cool to be able to just connect and share these stories of triumph, of heartache, of struggle and overcoming. Do you ever have that moment of like, holy shit, I can't believe this is what I get to do? Like, I have that frequently.
Every day. It was funny. I earlier today lost some audio that I was hoping to use for an episode, and I decided to pull an Audible and do a listener questions episode. And so I started crowdsourcing questions from the hurdle community. I refer to my audience as hurdlers. And so hurdlers started calling in, and I think over 5 hours, I got 42 questions sent in over voice message, which was more than I've ever received when I put out a call like that. And to hear not only where these people are calling in from, I have women calling from Abu Dhabi, Iran, England, Canada, like Florida, California, absolutely everywhere. That blows my mind that this thing that I, have had so many moments of doubt and hesitation, as so many creators do. And to know that throughout that doubt and through all of this hard work, I have the opportunity, exactly like you're saying, to help one person, help two people, and keep growing and growing and growing that community. That is so special. And beyond that, to be that connector, right? And that, I think, is probably the most special opportunity for me, is to put these, I would say that the demographic is mostly women. So to be able to connect these women from all parts of the globe together to help one another, that is truly, truly the biggest gift and the biggest blessing about this platform that I have created, is to empower women on their journey, again, to feel less alone. And maybe that is just like connecting with someone over Instagram that's in another city. Maybe that is through one of the hurdle session workshops that I run pretty regularly, which are different foundational moments where we talk about everything from how to start a podcast to how to find your power alone. Maybe it is through then these relationships with hurdlers meeting in person. I just had a hurdler meetup last week in Baltimore, and all of these women living within, 5-10 minutes of each other. Now they have this small community. And that happened because one day I decided that I was going to show up and I was going to use my skill set to try to help other people. And so, yeah, I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't feel so grateful for the opportunity that I have. And I recognize that even in these moments that like literally feel like at times my world is crashing around me, that I have a community that supports me back in return.
Love that. You've talked a lot about your relationship with your audience and the audience in general. You're someone who's very open about your own journey and your own struggles. And I'm curious about your relationship with yourself and how that's evolved through your guests and what you've learned from them.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway of all time is that you learn when you're listening. And it's, a show that I host, but it is a show that gives me so much because of that opportunity to listen. I wasn't always really comfortable getting more vulnerable. I do recognize that there is a time for vulnerability, and then there's a time maybe to restrain a little bit. I had Ash Wilking on the show, God, years ago now. She is a trainer at Rumble and based in the New York City area. And she said a quote that I always go back to, which is to be careful that the sword that you use to help others isn't the one that you fall on. And something else kind of along those same lines that I spoke with my life coach last week, she said to me, you can be open and vulnerable without having to divulge absolutely everything that's going on around you or in a certain circumstance. So for me, to just like model that it's okay not to be okay all the time. I would rather be a person of influence than like an influencer who is painting an unrealistic idea of what is going on with my life in the world, etc. My goal is to put a face to a lot of the things that so many women in my community are navigating on the regular, whether that is a great run versus a crappy run, or maybe it is a career struggle or not getting a job that I was up for, or sporadically, although like not often, talking about like the struggles that I have with my dating life. Like there are so many things that we have the opportunity to connect on. And I recognize that again, vulnerability is something that is somewhat of a superpower and a strength for me when used responsibly.
I love all of that. Particularly, I wrote down "you learn when you're listening," so it looked like I wasn't listening, but I was typing because I like that. I want to ask you a question. Following all of that you like to ask, how are you doing?
Man, let me just take a sip from my giant gallon water
I was
bottle
going to say
to the left.
that's impressive. Is that full of athletic greens?
If I drink this much athletic greens, for full disclosure of anyone listening to this, I have a gallon water jug next to me. I don't think they would advise you to drink that much athletic greens in one day. But it's funny that you said that in context to your question, because of the listener questions that I sourced, one of the women said, this question has nothing to do with a Lululemon tights recommendation or athletic greens. What I really want to know right now is, how are you really? And I laughed at the phrasing of that, but then got like those like big welly watery eyes emoji looking in my face moments where I was like, that was really kind of you to ask. And I feel really grateful that my community has been kind of checking in on me lately. I think that, I mean, back to that vulnerability note, there are certainly like some things that I've been navigating offline, but I feel really confident and grateful that I do have these people like all over the world that are kind of doing this pulse check on me. I always think that like February and March can be sticky months, so to speak. When I go back, and I'm a regular journaler. I journal pretty much every morning. And as a part of that, or a good byproduct of that really, is that I can go back and see how I was doing in February of last year, February of the year before. And I definitely noticed that some of my most, I would say, difficult seasons certainly happened during this time. So recognizing that it is a season and that I have the opportunity to do the best that I can with what I have and show up every day. I think that that is what keeps me going when I do kind of feel like I'm trying to crawl through the mud a little bit. Both personally and professionally, there have certainly been some hurdles that go not just hand in hand with this time of year, but also, you know, navigating what we do throughout a global pandemic. I'm sure that you can attest that taking everything completely remote, when you're a podcaster, I had only recorded 3 episodes remotely before March of 2020. And now, I mean, Hurdle's about to be on episode 200, and that's 200 of really like almost 400 episodes of the show that are numbered. So it's really crazy what you do when you have no other option except to trudge forward. And so I take the learnings that I have from these moments of adversity and hard times, and I remind myself that I am capable and I can do hard things and I can overcome these hurdles. So to circle back, I'm good. I won't lie and tell you I am stellar, but I find gratitude in my everyday. And I am looking forward to maybe a little brighter seasons ahead.
Pressure makes diamonds. I love people who answer that question honestly. It's like so many of us ask, "Oh, how are you doing?" "Oh, I'm good." "Oh, no, you're not. You can't possibly be good all the time." And so I think that it's one thing to ask the question, and it's another to answer the question. And I think it's really important, particularly now. I mean, for me, the pandemic illuminated that everyone is wading through life with bags of shit following alongside. It's just some people talk about it and others hide it. And so my favorite part about this podcast, your podcast, and others that wade into those waters is that it's illuminating the fact that we all are human and we all have this baggage that makes us unique. And if we didn't, it would be pretty boring. Like, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, genuine human connection, we keep using this word opportunity, but it is an opportunity, right? I would rather think and focus on quality over quantity. So let's bring that into our relationships, whether they be personal or professional. If I can find a way to connect more regularly with people that want to have authentic and legitimate and beautiful relationships, then I'm doing something right. And so to get there, I need to model that behavior, because you get in this world what you put out into this world. So I try to show up. Again, not every day is all sunshine and rainbows and fuzzy, but I show up every single day with gratitude and openness, knowing that if I put that out there, then I will receive that in return.
What's been the biggest surprise with an approach like that?
People aren't always going to treat you the same. And a lot of the time, the way that people interact with you really has nothing to do with you. And that is a really important takeaway that if you are listening to this, remember that in the interactions that you have, again, whether they be personally or professionally, you could meet someone with kindness, or you can meet them like lukewarm, or maybe you meet them not in the most kind way. Some people would react the same no matter how you approach that situation. So again, remember that their response often has nothing to do with you. And especially in a business setting, I think that it's hard oftentimes not to take things personally, but someone's reaction to you typically also hinges off of something that's coming from above them. And that might result in perhaps being a little bit snappy at times, treating you some kind of way. There's just other stresses in the world. So going back to this idea of leading with kindness, it's like, all right, well, I'm going to choose every day to show up and be kind and assume good in people. And to my experience so far, I would say that most of the time, that's the approach that I'm very much happy to take. I'm happy to be the person that gives people the benefit of the doubt and doesn't doubt their intentions. Because for me, it just, it gets me in a better place. It's a better way to live my life than choosing to look for the bad stuff. I remember once I was sitting with a girlfriend at lunch. Also, like, when did I become of the age where I started like referring to my girls that are friends as girlfriends? I actually feel like a senior citizen when I do that sometimes. But I was sitting with a friend at lunch, and she said something to me like, you can be a positive person and a pessimistic person, and you can be sitting next to each other at this table. And the positive person would look out into the street and see an elderly couple holding hands as they cross the sidewalk. Whereas the negative person or the pessimistic person can look out and see, or choose to see, that there's like a couple of trash bags that haven't been pointed out yet. And if you go through your life being the pessimistic person and the negative person, you're going to miss all of this beauty that's happening around you. And like, what kind of life is that? So I choose to see the couple holding hands walking down the street instead of the trash bags that are lingering on the other side of the sidewalk.
That's because grandparents are the best.
Oh, they're so good. They're so good.
Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting the podcast. I'm proud to partner with Tracksmith, and they're going to donate 5% of your order value to the Michael J. Fox Foundation for all orders, and you'll also get free shipping. The Michael J. Fox Foundation is dedicated to finding a cure and helping those living with Parkinson's. Both of my grandfathers have or had Parkinson's, and I'm grateful for Tracksmith's support for something so personal. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN will contribute towards this donation. I have been loving their Harrier long sleeve and Alston half tights in particular. Thanks again to For's Labs for supporting this episode of the podcast, as well as my own recovery. I've been loving the cryothermo massage gun ever since I got it a few months ago. And yes, a therapy gun that has both a hot and cold head is as awesome as it sounds. It's lightweight and portable and incredibly easy to take on the road, which you know is important to me. Grab yours today at forslabs.com with the code FTLR to save 15%. That's FORS labs.com with the code FTLR. Enjoy. So Apple categorizes this podcast as a running podcast. We've talked for 27 minutes and we haven't touched running yet. I love it.
I love that for us.
how does running factor into how you show up for life? And how does running meet you where you are?
Great question. Running for me is a constant reminder that I can show up and do hard things. Even the easy runs remind me that I have the opportunity to show up and do hard things. And there is never a single run that I take for granted. Now, that could be because of my history with running. When I started running, I believe it was back in 2008 or so. I was about halfway through that weight loss I mentioned during college. And when I began running, I ran a half a mile every single day. I was determined to learn how to love running. Working at a summer camp at the time, I didn't have access to like a big box gym. I had previously been going to like a Planet Fitness and getting on the elliptical, and that's how I was getting in my exercise. But without that available to me, I was determined to keep up my healthy habits and continue on that weight loss journey. And so running at first, I used it as a tool to continue on that journey, as a tool for weight loss, but it has carried on as a theme in my life and turned into and given me so much more. For me, those half miles then became a mile. Those miles became a 5K. And kind of as the story goes, half marathons, dozens of them later, 10 marathons later, I can now say that the lessons that I have learned on the run are some of the most important and valuable period in my life. For me, running is not optional. Running is something that helps me tick. It makes me who I am. And it gives me the confidence to know that I can persevere through those hard moments, through those hurdles. And even if it is difficult as all hell, I'm going to come out on the other side a better person, having faced those challenges.
Yeah, it's like a sandbox to experiment in and try and fail and fail and try and see where it goes. I think that's the coolest thing about it. Again, referring to the retreat I was at this past weekend, we were in a session led by Peter Bromka talking about writing related to running, and there was a writing teacher there who specializes in like teaching teachers how to teach writing. And so he had some really interesting reflections. And one of them was most other sports like wouldn't have this conversation, right? It's not this like in-depth, like, do you think hockey players have the same thoughts, or soccer, maybe soccer players, but like, I don't think so. And I think it's so unique to it. Probably not even sprinters. I think it's so unique to our sport that like what we do for fun is a microcosm for life.
It's interesting that you say that. I think that I may disagree. And I think that's like a bubble thing. Like, I think this is the bubble that we're in, but this has become such a large part of our life that for those people, whether it be like in like basketball or skating or whatnot, like when you care so deeply about the thing that you do, I think that it teaches you some of these lessons regardless of, like what avenue it's in, right? So you'd be hard pressed not to find like a basketball player that wouldn't talk to you about the hours and hours and hours that they put in on that court by themselves that framed them to be who they are today. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. Yeah. I'm more so thinking about the like the reflections on the run, the reflections from picking a specific event and training for it. But now that you put it that way, it's like, I mean, the 10,000 hours is 10,000 hours. So it's like you have to achieve mastery through investment of time.
I do think that time aspect, to your point, is a big part of the reason why there is so much room for reflection within running. When you are committing so many hours of your week, even if it's, starting out, even if your whole week of running is 30 minutes or an hour of time versus like someone who's a lot more advanced and they're running for something like 15, 20, 25 hours a week, like it's a big deal. It's time that you wouldn't have taken to be alone with yourself otherwise. And that is why that room for reflection is there.
Yeah, I think so much of, I mean, I run a lot of my miles with other people, and even still, there's still room for thinking and reflecting and, oh my God, can I really keep up with this group for the next 10 miles? That kind of stuff. So I'm curious how your relationship with running has evolved as it's gone from a tool to help with weight loss to a tool that enables you to be the best version of yourself. Maybe that's the same component, or maybe not, as well as a tool that helps you connect, most importantly.
Yeah. For me, for a really long time, running was solely a solo experience. So when I was getting used to running, learning how to make running feel good for me, that period, I would say between like 5 and 10 years almost of running was just something that I did for me. It was my me time. It was how I processed. It was my therapy before I was ever in therapy. And as I got older, I sought out community for running. Most recently, in the last few years, within the New York area, I run with both Brooklyn Track Club and Old Man Run Club. If you asked Emily like 10 years ago if she would have like taken a trip to Miami with her run club in her 30s, like she would have laughed at you and been like, "What are you talking about?" But it's something that brings me a lot of joy now. It's that sense of community, especially as we get older. It is challenging to form relationships and friendships, regardless of your geographic location. And so to be able to use a common interest as the foundation for those relationships is a really beautiful, again, that word, opportunity. And then for me, as I have grown as a runner, I started running, and for those first like 5 to 8 years, even, times weren't something I concerned myself with. When I ran my first marathon, I didn't even know that like running a sub 4 hour marathon was like a kind of beginner benchmark of something that you wanted to do. And let me make sure that I caveat that like no matter how long it takes you to run a marathon, it is an absolutely beautiful and wonderful accomplishment. But I think I ran my first one in something like 4:01 or 4:03. And if I had known at that time that I should be concerned about that, or that I wanted to get sub 4, so to speak, like it would have completely been a different experience, but I wasn't concerned with that. And I was so focused with the joy that running brought me. And that joy is still there, but now I've kind of grown into a runner who is like kind of seeking to always get more out of myself, both on the run and in life. I think there's a parallel there. And so with time, as I have been doing this for longer, my times have gotten faster. Again, I mentioned 10 marathons in. I feel really grateful for that journey. But sometimes on that journey, I almost wish that I was like the Emily back in, I forget what year I ran my first marathon now. I want to say maybe it was like 2012 or 2013. Sometimes I wish that I had her like doe-eyed innocence about running back. I remember last year in the New York Marathon, there were some really big, beautiful takeaways from that race for me that didn't go as I had hoped. I got to mile 8 or 9, and I literally felt like I was already hitting a wall. And it just wasn't the race that I had hoped for. And reflecting on it, there were certainly a few different things that I would do differently. However, I was really proud of myself in that time that I was able to find so much gratitude for the mentality that I took with me as I persevered through that race. Not letting my negative self-talk or some of the things that I was saying at points get me down and continue, instead of maybe pulling out. Like that was never an option for me, even though it wasn't going how I had envisioned. And that mental strength is something that I certainly didn't have years ago, to be able to continue on like that. But I think about, what if you had just chosen to purely enjoy it? Like purely be present in the moment and like kiss babies and high five and like do all the things. Like, what if you didn't concern yourself for a second with that time like you did during that first 2012, 2013 marathon? Like, what could that day have been like for you? And honestly, like it would have been a different experience. It would have been a different experience, but now I have that day to reflect on and think about the next time that I am going through, again, what feels like the mud. I can think to myself, what if you just remove yourself from this right now? What if you focus on seeking your joy and why you run in the first place instead of getting down on yourself about not being on a pace of where you had hoped? And go forward with that. So yeah, I mean, there are times that I wish I was that like innocent OG runner, Emily. And there are moments where I'm so grateful for how far I've come. And of course, like excited for where I'm going as well.
Do you think you can weave parts of both of those Emilys that you like the most into one version and run a race like that?
Yeah. I mean, that Emily that like had the most fun of her life and like crushed life, period, was Chicago 2019 Marathon Emily. I went into the Chicago Marathon like going after at that time, which was a big, scary, hairy, audacious goal, as Shalane puts it, of I think I wanted to hit like a 340. And that day I hit a 328.08. And I had no idea what I was even doing while I was doing it. Like I was living my best life. I was out there. It was the perfect day. I like didn't even know where I was in the world because like that was my second or third time ever to Chicago. People were friendly. I think I chugged like a beer at one point, and it was the best day. And so I know that like the Emily of both worlds in there exists. I remember when I realized like how fast I was actually going and that like a BQ was on the radar for me, I like Siri audio texted my father and I was like, I need you to let me know what the time is for BQing. Like, this is how much it wasn't even on my radar. Like, I didn't even know what time you had to get to BQ, but I realized that I was running pretty fast and that like it might be something I could do. So I had Siri ask my dad, like, how fast do I need to run? And when I realized it was in my wheelhouse, then like all bets were off. Like there was no way that I wasn't going to get that time. And that was like the perfect combination of both.
How did it happen?
It's a great question. I think there are a few things that happened that day that made that day special and made it happen. Cannot say enough about the conditions. I think it was like 48 and sunny, literally like the ideal weather for a marathon. I trained hard for that marathon and I felt like I was really getting into a groove with like a lot of things in my life at the time. I was finally in a place in my life where I felt really empowered alone, like as an entrepreneur, as a single woman in my 30s, just like feeling really invigorated by my own potential. I had previously had a couple of races that weren't super stellar, staring at you, Boston 2018. And so I was out like for a vengeance after a lot of things that were out of my control and asking myself, like, what was it that I could do differently? And I think that ultimately that's a little bit why like New York was a tad disappointing for me last year, was that I felt like I had really dialed in on a lot of different aspects. But the end of the day, the downfall for me in New York was the amount of stress that I was under, probably professionally, during like the buildup.
You also had quite a weekend.
No, I know. I mean, like I did one of the biggest interviews of my career the day before running the marathon with Shalane. And it was like the most special and wonderful moment. And I wouldn't have traded it for anything. It's one of the best interviews I've ever done. But like I was waking up in the red on my Whoop despite getting like 8 hours of sleep every night. And I think that I was just dealing with a lot personally and professionally and just that perfect storm of so many things. I think about like how these elite athletes like perform under all of that stress. And I'm like, they truly like, that's literally why they are elite. But I will dial back to Chicago quickly. The secret to that marathon, aside from the weather, was fueling like I did. I think I was eating that entire marathon. Like, I don't think there were like more than 10 minutes at a time where I was thinking in my head, like, when was the last time you had one of these chews or gel or whatever? And I was just constantly fueling, and I had fueled up really well leading up in the weeks to that race. And it was really a perfect storm of preparation and self-belief that got me to that big day.
It's so cool when everything comes together, and it's so rare. And I say like, oh, like 1 in 10 marathons goes that way, because you have to be like sharp mentally, you have to be sharp physically, and not, just trained enough, but not over that line. The weather has to be perfect. Like your morning poop has to be perfect. Like all of these things have to go perfectly. And so it's those days that when they happen, like we live for that. That was my experience in Providence 2019. I showed up on that start line, and it was a celebration of the last 2 or 3 or 4,000 miles that I had run. It was 52 and drizzling, and I was like an animal uncaged. I was like, let me go. And I went out, and I had been chasing the BQ for 4 years, and I had swung and missed 4 times. And I really didn't care what I ran on that day. I was like, how well can I execute today? And I went out and I was running like effortless 6:45s, which is just under BQ pace. And I was like, this is magic. And this is like being on another planet. And it was magical. I finished that race and I screamed in the face of the woman who handed me the medal, because I was so stoked of like what I just did. And those are the days that make it so worth it. That's why we get up when it's dark out. That's why we get up when it's cold or hot or whatever the challenging hurdles might be, because you can't have those days that are magical without the boring, monotonous ones. And that's what makes running so special. Like the marathon doesn't owe you anything. Running doesn't owe you anything. You only get what you put into it. And it's such like a beautiful thing, because in this world, so many people are just given success conventionally, and they don't earn it, they don't deserve it, but they just live with it, and they might not even appreciate it. But with a physical endeavor like an endurance sport, you cannot be successful long term without doing the work. So this pivots me to a question or a topic that I love, that I'm so curious about, which is defining success. You are someone who society would deem successful, right? Like you have a successful podcast, you have a successful job, you are running, you are doing all these things, you're helping people live their best versions of themselves. I'm curious how you define success.
Yeah. To your point before, we don't know joy if we haven't experienced pain. And we don't appreciate the wins without having navigated the losses. And so when I think about what my definition of success is, to me, success is, how am I doing good in the world? How am I helping other people? And in that execution of helping other people, am I truly experiencing joy? Because no matter how much of a giver you are, and believe me, I identify heavily with being a giver of my time and my energy and of physical things, you name it. But no matter how much of a giver you are, if that act ultimately brings you pain and discomfort and sadness, then you need to check yourself with how you're showing up in the world. And so for me, success is truly being able to give to my community and to show up and to bring good things to the world with good intentions, knowing that I am staying true to who I am and that I'm helping other people. That for me is entirely what success is. And I don't think you achieve success and you're done. I will never be done. For me, success is waking up every day and understanding that I have the opportunity to help someone new. And it has nothing to do with how many people follow me or how many downloads that the show has, although those things are fun at times, right? But it's more so that I know that in my quest for more and more and more and doing good, that I am also being a good person and living my values. And that's really special. So that's what success is for me.
And it's wholly within your control.
For sure. I mean, would it be dope to have like another New York Times write up or be featured in like some other cool places outside of where Hurdle and I have been featured before? Like, of course, but those don't make me successful. What's in your Instagram bio shouldn't be the thing that determines your success or your self-worth. What determines your success or self-worth is what's happening. I'm pointing at my heart, like what's happening in your heart and what's happening in your head, and learning how to do things like foster that positive internal dialogue and better show up as who you truly are in society. And I keep going back to this word intention, but only you know your intention, right? So get really honest with yourself about what it is that you want and how you want to show up and what you want your legacy to be and what you hope that people are saying about you when you're not in the room. That is like the most beautiful exercise that you can do with yourself is ask yourself right now, how would I describe myself? And how do I want people to perceive me? If you have 5 minutes in a room with a group of new people who have never met you before, and you think to yourself, like, who do I want to be? Would they give the same 5 descriptors that you would hope to give yourself? And if not, what is it about a circumstance or society or whatever, maybe discomfort that you haven't yet to articulate? What is it about those things that are preventing you from showing up as your most true, authentic self? Do that exercise and you might be surprised to think about what you're going to learn.
I love that. I think it's a good place to wrap. And if you're still listening, please do that exercise. If you're on a run, spend the next 5, 10, 20 minutes of your run thinking about what Emily just said. And if you're open to it, share it with us. Tag Emily, tag I on social. We'd love to see that. Where can we find you if we want to follow along with you and your story and your podcast and all the good stuff you're putting out into the world?
Well, you can find Hurdle wherever you are listening to this lovely podcast. Hurdle on social is over at Hurdle Podcast. We would love to welcome you into the world as a hurdler. You are part of my community. Hurdle also has a not so secret Facebook group that you can check out called Hurdlers if you just search it in your Facebook search bar. I'm over on Instagram over at Emily Abbate. And in addition, if you like Hurdle and you want to be a hurdler and you really want the full experience, make sure you subscribe to the weekly Hurdle. The link to do that is in the show notes of every single episode. Again, we would love for you to be a part of the community.
Emily has mentioned that her audience is mainly women. I'm not a woman. I listen to it and I love it. So it's not just for women. So definitely check it out. Emily, thanks so much for taking some time to chat today. And we'll see you out there.
Appreciate you. Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Of course. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run. And in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.